Question: what do you bathe in that belongs to your enemies? Blood, of course. And what better way to get your gore on than to test the staples of your painting desk and see what makes the best blood spatter. I'm going to be doing a full unit for this one, so we have something to experiment on. 5 models for 5 attempts. I'll be using the slaughter-hungry and aptly named Robot Legion Flesh Eaters from One Page Rules. Starting with a speed paint to get the models to the blood spatter stage, I'm priming them silver to make it go even faster. Let's start with the speed paint. I've got my palette turned around this time because I'm going to be doing a wash, and I want the wash to remain at a constant saturation. Usually when you do a wash over multiple models from a wet palette, it can start to thin out by the time you get to the last model. By using the dry palette, that can't happen, and you only have to worry about it drying out instead, so work fast. I've mixed some mystery medium into the water and red oxide as well. And by mystery, I don't mean I don't want to tell you or anything, I mean it's a mystery even to me. One of my coworkers from back in my GW days gave me it because he didn't like using it, but I loved using it. It was an unmarked bottle of opaque goo. I knew it was meant for paint, but that's it. So when it runs out, I'm on my own to find something similar, but it makes for some really nice washes. Lamia medium should give the same kind of effect if you don't have a mystery medium of your own. You just want to make sure you're getting the dilution correct, so really not a lot of pigment to the medium. Usually just a dollop on the tip of your brush is enough for a whole well of medium in water. Now make sure this dries fully before you do anything else. With so much water and paint and medium pooling up, it may take a while, and you don't want to be ripping undried paint up. If you think what you've got at this point looks fine, it is a speed paint after all, you can certainly skip the next color. But I do find when it comes to making interest on your model, the more colors the better. I'm adding a darker brown wash in a controlled way, getting only parts facing away from the light source I've imagined, and in the deep crevices. Now for me, I'm going to stop after this step, but if you're not in a hurry, a few more washes with some blues or teals or oranges can give it even more pop and detail without changing the technique. Just get more sparing with each color and you can have a quick robot army in no time. For me though, I'm going to add more details in the old-fashioned way, right after this dries. Now I know we're all here for the blood, so I'm going to speed through this a bit. Right now I'm doing a base coat for the factory painted parts. Just purple, some thinner, and the mystery medium on my palette. I'm doing it quickly of course, but also trying to keep it away from the edges of plates a bit so we won't have to do so much chipping later, and also making sure that if the armor is dented anywhere, I avoid that spot for the same reason. I also didn't mean to be painting the knee plates, but I got some on it here, so we'll call it a happy little accident, fill it in and keep going. It was also a bit patchy after the first time, so gave it a second coat. Adding some white and more of the medium, I make a thin layer to go over top the purple already done. I do this in the highlight areas that are facing my light source. I'm not too picky about it though, since more detail is going to be added after with the lining, and it's fine for just getting through it quickly. We're going for an overall look, not a precise one. Then a bit more white and another layer of the same thing, just a bit more sparingly, and making sure to drag my brush to the middle of the areas before lifting it. To do the lining, I want to make sure these guys are still as beat up and as battered as possible. So while I do want to make highlights, I don't want them pristine. I'll be going into more depth into what I mean and how I do this in another upcoming video, but the main idea is that after you draw in the highlights, you want to roughen the edges with stippling and scratches. While you can be much more precise with this, for a speed paint like this, the randomness along the edges will just help break up the straight lines. Now let it be said that I'm quite a lazy painter, and so I'm going to be lazy with the skulls, adding only the brown I did for the wash earlier to the palette, because it was already on my desk. Adding white to that paint, I paint a base coat over the whole skulls. Now I did this a bit backwards for this one and added a brown wash first, but scrapped that idea and throw it away. Because when I started layering on the first highlight, it made no difference, so just go right to this step. Layering on up to white, using texture like we did with the factory paint. When you've got that, add the brown wash. Here I felt I was covering up too much of the white though, so I got in there with my big fingers and wiped some away. Call it finger blending if you will, but that's pretty much what it is. Now this is probably the antithesis to speed painting, but I wanted to bring back some of the metallics and the chipped paint, so I'm cheating. Of course, when don't I cheat when painting a model? I got these weathering pencils from AK Interactive on a whim to try them out, and I couldn't figure out the official way you're supposed to use them, but they're great for this, just adding chipping along edges, and no need to worry about your brush ever drying out. I even do a bunch on the body just to give some of those parts a bit of the effect. Lastly, I'm just doing some quick lights, adding a thinned out white to the eye holes and face holes, then when it's dry using some light teal, thinned down, pulling it to the edges so some of the white shines through. Now this is something I like to keep in the habit of doing, but if you don't have an airbrush, you're free to skip this. It's not a huge effect, so it won't be missed if it's not there. But I like to add some color change to the angles. Using the same teal, I just do light coats of it around the glow points and from an under angle on the left side of the model, like there's a faint glow from off base somewhere. So here's how they look at this point. A good cohesive unit with lots of character, but not a lot of work. They're missing one thing though, and that's the red of a good blood soaking. So we're going to try 5 different ways of making blood splatter, and see which one gives us the best effect without using special blood effects paints. I'll be applying them in mostly the same way, so it's more about what gives us the best final look, not how it goes on. Blood number 1 is just red paint with thinner. I would use water, but I don't think it's going to behave like we'd want it to. So as a control, anything we need to thin down, I'm using the same thinner. I got it thin and loaded my brush up with it. This is the general method I'll use for all of them. First, I'll swipe the brush at the model to get large splats. Tapping it against the paint holder worked well for this on later ones, but kinda gave me a bit too much on this one. Then using my finger or blowing on the brush to let the brush fling smaller droplets of the blood, and then wash any weapons or claws at the tips. Blood number 2 is going to be just red ink. I'm using scale 75s. It's thin to start, so I don't need much thinner, and then just do the same process. So now that we have our 2 base pigment types, red paint and red ink, what can we put in them to make them act more like blood? I happen to have the satin medium, which kind of gives paint a semi-gloss finish. So with the red paint, I put a bunch of that in, and let's see what kind of result we get. For blood number 4, why not mix our 2 base reds and see what we get? So a red ink with the red paint and some thinner, going through the same process to get it on the model. For our last blood, I'm doing a wild card. I have a water effects medium for basing, and I thought that if we add some of the red ink, we might get that high gloss wet blood sheen. So I am going for it, just to experiment though. I'm sure it's really not meant to be used in this way and will take about 24 hours to fully dry. Really, I would equate this to a gloss varnish or medium, so you don't have to use what I'm using if you like the effect and have one of those. Also, while this is fun, it can be a little messy, so make sure you prepare your area accordingly like I didn't. So here are the results. Blood number 1, red paint. Because most of my paints are matte, the effect of a matte red blood isn't that believable. It's a bit flat, but still a worthy effect that you can get away with. Number 2, red ink. While the blood has more shine to it, and that's just how inks are, It's more like a glass shine to me than a natural one. This also works well, and I'd say a bit better than just paint, but it's still not as believable. Blood number 3, paint with the satin medium. This is the one I was most hopeful for. That's why I used it on my favorite sculpt of the bunch. However, in the end, I don't think the satin had as much shine as the pure ink did. Maybe I didn't add enough, but I would rate this one above just paint, but not better than the plain ink. Blood number 4, the two reds mixed. This behaved exactly as expected, like a mix between paint and ink. You have a bit of the shine, but not so much of it that it looks like glass, and the saturation feels more organic, where there was some spots with thin pigment and some dense, especially on the claws. For me, this is the kind of look I like, and so is my winner of this experiment. Blood number 5, red ink and water effects or gloss varnish. If you like that wet gore look, this is how you get it. It mostly looks like fresh blood, so it's good if you're trying to depict a recent kill, though I think it could be a bit better if you were able to get it on in thicker globs and make it coat the model like a sticky ichor, which is what the blood effects paints are better for. Whichever blood splatter you use, I think it's going to work out fine. Nobody's going to think that you accidentally spilled paint on your model. They're going to understand it's blood. For me, I'm going to be using ink and paint from now on. I really like that effect for when I do blood splatter. And let me know in the comments which one you thought was the best, or if you have your own blood technique that you like to use. And I'll see you on the next painting journey.